For me, when you cross the line with true innocence for your own gratification, it behooves me to stand in my truth and speak about these things.
If I believe something is true and someone's hurting somebody else, and I don't do something about it, the truth is I don't believe it. I don't believe that I would stand up for truth.
Welcome to the Time Has Come podcast. My name is Graham Wardle, and today I have my good friends Kerry James and Donny back on the show with me together for a fascinating conversation about standing for truth, about being in integrity with yourself, moving closer to God, and confronting conspiracy theories, asking deeper questions, and so much more. Now, before we get into the episode, I got to give a little disclaimer. Viewer discretion is advised. There is some language in this episode, and we do deal with some sensitive topics, so please be aware. Also, before we get going, I got to give you a little context. I had a run-in with a man named John Podesta while Don and Kerry and I were in Mexico. We were at a pizza restaurant called Moqueques down in Barra de Navidad in Mexico, and in walks a man who I recognized later as John Podesta. Now, after he walked by me, we locked eyes, and I nodded just to acknowledge somebody new coming into the restaurant. I then saw I knew who it was. It clicked, and all the conspiracy theories and things and documentaries that I'd seen online came rushing back into my mind. Now, if you don't know who John Podesta is, you've probably heard of Pizzagate. Pizzagate is a term that was coined for a conspiracy theory about a pizza parlor called Comet Ping Pong and all these different things that were going on, but it mostly relates to a bunch of leaked emails from John Podesta back in 2016 when he was acting as Hillary Clinton's chairman for her presidential run. So a bunch of emails were leaked, people went through them, they were leaked on WikiLeaks, and people went through them and found some interesting language, some language that didn't really make sense for the context of the emails. And it was around food, particularly items like hot dogs and pizza being flown in from other parts of the country for prices that seemed unusual for private parties at the White House. Now, what makes this unusual is there's an investigative reporter called Ben Swan, and he had a show called Reality Check on mainstream television, and he broke this down very fairly in just the facts of some of the former code language that the FBI has documented that people that are sex trafficking minors use to refer to children to keep them from being caught. And what's interesting is some of this language was in these emails that were leaked from John Podesta. Now, this doesn't prove anything. However, it is unusual, and the mainstream media has discredited this, and they've said they've debunked it, and there's nothing to this. And there's also some potential concerns around these theories getting into people's heads, and they get crazy and they go off. And there was a gentleman who tried to shoot up the pizza restaurant called Comet Ping Pong. So I'm not trying to propagate things to provoke violence. What I'm saying is I want to share with you a story of bumping into John Podesta at this pizza restaurant, and what happened to me, what happened to my friend Kerry and my friend Don, and our interaction with that. And then that led us into a further conversation about integrity, about truth, about asking questions, and a lot more. So if you want to find out more about John Podesta and the Pizzagate and all these different things, I've left some links in the show notes below. Some of the films and things in the news report from Ben Swan for the show that he did called Reality Check, where he covered the symbology and the terms used that the FBI has documented, that these are official terms. It's not like a made up thing that people are just saying this is what it means. So the reason that I'm giving you this context is because if you don't know this, then the conversation to start off this episode might not make sense to you. So just a little bit, so you don't have to watch the documentaries and the news clips below. If you want to, you can, but I'm going to give you a little context. So some of the emails that were leaked from John Podesta talked about ordering pizza and hot dogs and having them flown in on private planes to a private party at the White House for a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars. And so it's a little unusual. And there's also emails talking about getting pizza for half an hour. So Liz Crokin, in the documentary Out of Shadows, she has a little segment at the end of the film where she kind of talks about the oddity of expressing yourself in this way. Most people, they get a service, they get a massage for half an hour, but they go and get pizza for however long they want. No one really puts a time frame around that. Now, maybe some people do. Maybe they say, hey, we're gonna go to a movie, so we're gonna have pizza for half an hour, then we'll go to the movie at 7 o'clock, something like that. But if you read some of these emails and you look at the context and you look at the whole message there, something does seem off. I'm not saying that this is proof of any behavior or illegal things that are going on, but it's weird. And this is what we talk about in the opening of this episode, is how when you consume this material, you ask these questions. For myself, it left me the opposite of starstruck. When I saw him, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I want to meet him. All these images and all these narratives came flooding back into me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, is this even true? I don't know. However, it is very odd, and I'm still looking into it, and I hope other people do too. And I also hope that if none of it is true, that he is cleared of this, and there is a reasonable explanation for the language in those emails, and what they're talking about can easily be explained away. At this point, I haven't seen an explanation that really satisfies me deep in my core, but I hope there is one, because I don't want that to be true. However, I'm also willing to look at it and to ask a serious question, because if it is true, we need to get to the bottom of it properly, with proper police investigations, as opposed to just documentaries and theories online and people taking justice into their own hands and showing up at Comet Ping Pong. So that's what I want to say. I hope you enjoy this episode. It dives really deep. We talk about a lot of these things. I deeply respect Donny Mac and Kerry James for this conversation, and I love them both. So I hope you enjoy it. The time has come to welcome Donny Mac and Kerry James to the show once again. Thanks for being here, guys.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure.
Thanks for doing another podcast. This is my two favorite guests, my two best friends. We're doing another podcast. We're in Mexico together, and we thought we'd hang out and shoot another podcast and just shoot the proverbial shit.
I love it.
That would be messy.
It would be messy, but I want to start with a story that we were out to dinner, and we came across an individual that I immediately recognized, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I was like frozen.
Yeah, you were.
And then you guys were like, what happened?
You couldn't even speak.
Yeah. So we're in Mexico, in Manzanillo.
Barra de Navidad.
Barra de Navidad. And we were at a restaurant having pizzas, and in walks this guy with a group of other people, and they're trying to get a table and they can't get it. And so they're like, oh, they don't like the table. So they're like, give us a different table. So they go to the other side of the restaurant. And as they're walking away, there was a man with like 5 other women, I think it was. 5 or 6 other women.
Yep, 5.
Something like that.
5.
And as they're walking by, the guy turns and he locks eyes with me. And I kind of give him a nod, just like acknowledging his presence and welcome to the restaurant kind of thing. And I immediately figure out who this guy is. It struck me. So it was John Podesta, who's the former chief of staff for the White House. He ran Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016, I believe. And his emails were famously leaked, stolen from a phishing attack by a Russian hacking group. They basically sent him an email saying like, hey, update your Google password, click this link. And he clicked it. And they stole his account, and they stole all his emails. And then WikiLeaks, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, they released those emails a few months later. And there was this big thing about those emails and like what was included in them. And so I had seen documentaries about this, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I know the emails are legitimate. I don't know necessarily about all the conspiracies around it, but they're really odd.
Extremely
odd. So just a little bit of context, guys, for everybody watching. There's a lot of conspiracies out there, and I'm not saying that anything I'm about to say is true, but I'm referencing what has been documented, and then also some of the potential ideas or why people are weirded out by this. So one of the emails that was in this batch of emails leaked, or stolen, I should say, and then leaked from WikiLeaks to the public, was about $65,000 worth of pizza and hot dogs that was flown from Chicago to the White House for a private party. The email was something about like, I think Obama spent $65,000 for hot dogs and pizza flown in from Chicago. Very odd.
Extremely odd numbers for hot dogs. I'm pretty sure you can feed a few thousand people.
Yeah, so this was the context of it, and there's conspiracies about hot dogs and pizza being code words for boys and girls. And so the FBI had released some of these code words and symbols and stuff, and I'll link below to a news report done on CBS by a guy named Ben Swan called Reality Check is the show, where he kind of goes over this stuff. Anyways, all that to be said, I've seen some documentaries alleging the connections, what this might mean. Nothing's been proven so far, but it's very odd. Anyways, so I see John Podesta, and I know this is him. And he's walking like right in front of us, and I lock eyes with him, and I acknowledge him. And then I like, oh my gosh, that's John Podesta. And immediately my mind goes into all the documentaries I've seen about him. And I tell Kerry, and Kerry's like, I know who that is too. Don, no idea. Don has no idea.
No clue.
So he's like, who is it? And we're trying to explain it, and he's like, what'd you do?
Well, it was interesting. At first, you guys, like, well, Kerry, you spoke a little bit, but you couldn't even talk. I was like, dude, you got to speak. Words. I just need words. I don't know why. Why are we freaking out? Do I need to like call the police? Do I need to defend something? Like what's happening right now?
Yeah. It spooked me so bad. I literally went out front and started trying to spot his security detail.
Yeah.
That's how it spooked me big time.
Yeah.
You were both really, like, I have never seen either of you act like that before. It actually threw me. Yeah. I was like,
well, knowing that you're in the same room,
old man has got you guys that, like, what is happening?
I mean,
Who is this guy?
That's the defender of the elites. I mean, no proof, but yeah, he's the guy that stands between the world and the elites, at least for this kind of grouping. That's the chief of staff to the White House.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. And he's done a number of different things as well. And again, like obviously, we're not saying that he's done any of the things that are alleged in the conspiracies or the rumors and stuff, but it's just very weird. And I've seen all those documentaries, so I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the dude. So Don says, are you sure? I'm like, I'm like pretty sure. And I look up his photo. I'm like, yeah, that's the guy. And then Don's like, what did you say? You're like, I'm gonna go over and talk to him.
Just go ask him.
I'm gonna go ask him. So I was like, okay.
If you want to know and he's right there, let's just go talk to him.
So Don goes over and tell the story. What'd you do?
Yeah, I just walked over and all the ladies sort of stopped and looked at me. One lady kept talking to him. They were in the middle of a conversation. And for some reason, which is not like me, because usually I'll say like, pardon me, can I interrupt? But for some reason I just didn't. I just kind of went up. I'm like, excuse me. Oh, I did say, excuse me, actually. I said, excuse me, is your name John? And then the whole table just kind of went, whoo. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, is your last name? And Podesta. I think I said it properly at the time. And he's like, and then he got proud and he was like, yeah. He kind of sat up, which was weird because he looked very frail, extremely frail. Anyway, and they're like, oh, and then all the ladies started going, oh, this was bound to happen, like with who you are. And I was just like, and I said, and one of the ladies said, why do you ask? I'm like, oh, me and my friends have a bet. We're trying to figure out if they recognized you or not. And they're like, well, did you win? And I was like, no.
I mean, this is neither here, but it's like maybe, like we all have our own political favors, but I actually saw this as a great sign for America and America's health because obviously I'm a conservative Canadian and would be a Republican voter in the States, very, very against the ideology of the Democrats and the Liberals here in Canada. So what I found interesting is we came across John Podesta. That was January 2nd. That was the
January 20th.
That was the inauguration day for Trump. Yeah. So the fact that he was out of country, hiding somewhere else, is how I interpreted it.
Potentially, yeah.
I thought that was.
I never put that together.
I thought that was good news.
Interesting.
I thought it was interesting and good news.
Interesting. And so the reason I wanted to start the podcast with this is because I've been shifting my podcast, and I want to talk about more issues revolving around men becoming a man and masculinity. And I thought this was a really interesting situation because we all had different reactions to this. And none of it, we didn't have proof in front of us. It's not like we're police officers or we're like, oh, there's the criminal, we gotta go catch him. It was just more so of like a window into, here's a potential, how are we gonna react to this? And also, are we reacting off factual information, or this is just a combination of, it's like we've had people come up, I'm sure you have as well, like people come up to you and they recognize you and they get excited.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And they're like, it's like a
shaky.
Yeah, because they've seen you so much on television, right?
Yeah.
And so this was like the reverse of that, where I've seen so many times this guy on television, but in a negative context, I was like frozen.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like I'm experiencing this as well. But also the mind tricks. Like after I calmed myself down, I was like, oh, wait a second. Yeah. You went outside, there was no security, there's no like, guys watching with.
It wasn't the spy movie that it instantly,
right? But your mind thinks it's like that.
To it. My brain was like panicking with details. And I was like, yeah, you're right. This is real life.
Yeah.
It isn't like the movies.
Yeah, it isn't like the movies. And then Don, I think you said something along the lines of like, I'm just going to go talk to him. I was like, what? You're like, I can't remember what you said, something but like Jesus has got my back or something. What did you say?
I said I have nothing to fear. There's nothing he can do to me.
Yeah.
Like I got Jesus on my side.
That's what it was. I got Jesus on my side.
What's this guy going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, from what I've seen and heard since that night, not a nice reputation. Not someone I would want to necessarily go get to know, but
yeah, and I don't know a ton about him either. Like all I've seen is some of the negative connotations and stories behind him. So he may be a lovely individual that none of this is true, and it's like really unfortunate. And I don't want to propagate something that's
and I think
not
it's important to give the benefit of the doubt like that, because it'd be different if I'd personally witnessed him do something malicious or evil, then I can act on that.
Yes.
However, this is all hearsay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I think is so interesting, is because it was the first time I kind of got caught in this, and you guys were there, and we all had our own reactions about this. And also, it's a sensitive topic. Like, if allegations of pedophilia and child sex trafficking are true, that's horrible, right? And none of us would stand for that. And that, that's like, it gets your blood boiling.
And I definitely would not want people coming up and accusing me of that if you didn't never done it.
Exactly.
That's like, accusing someone of that without having any proof is it's pretty damning.
Totally, right?
Ruin someone's life.
Yeah,
just for the accusation.
Exactly.
Right.
So, I mean, we're playing sort of the other side of this, obviously, to what some of the films that we've watched and reports that have come out about this stuff. But I think it's the way you need to handle it, because, like you said, if this wasn't true and John Podesta is like completely innocent, and people are like, trying to kill him, because this is a big part of it too. Just to kind of a little backstory. Once these emails came out, I think it was some individual went to a pizza parlor called Comet Ping Pong Pizza, and they fired a gun into it or something, just like a single round. Some random dude off the internet, because he saw some of these documentaries.
Yeah.
And then he was like, I'm gonna go because they're trafficking children in this pizza parlor. And so he went in and tried to scare them off or do something. So then he got arrested. And so it became
public.
Just like volatile, like violent potentially, right? So I'm not trying to perpetuate that. I just want to share what we experienced, and also just kind of like the different reactions to it. And I thought it was very fascinating that we ran into him here in this tiny little town in Mexico. So
I would have said it was otherwise impossible. The odds.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's what I want to start with, guys. Share that crazy story with you all. And again, maybe if I didn't outline it all, the emails, $65,000 worth of pizza and hot dogs flown from Chicago into the White House for a private party. And then there's part of the email says, are we using the same channels, like a question mark? And the reason that they use code words is because they don't want to leave any evidence or trails around if they are people that are actually participating in this type of behavior. They want to make sure they don't actually explicitly say, we're flying in a whole bunch of boys and girls for this type of stuff. So they use code language. They use pizza, they use pasta, they use handkerchief, hot dogs, all these different ice cream, all these different things they're all code words for them to be like, hey, I want to go and get a male hooker. Well, I think it's called ice cream. Or I want to have a little girl that's underage. I'm gonna call it pizza, and hot dog is a boy. So there's all this weird language, and it's in some of these emails in a context that doesn't make sense. Like, I'm gonna go grab pizza for half an hour. It's like, who goes to get pizza for half an hour?
Doesn't make any sense.
You go to grab a slice of pizza, but when was the last time you said to your friends, like, oh, let's go get an ice cream for half an hour? You wouldn't say that. Like, it's a very odd thing.
Yeah,
right?
and
not to say that proves anything.
We're not, but then again, we know both the Clintons and the entire administration, including Obama and Mitchell, all went. We're frequent visitors to the Epstein Island. So
were they on the list for the flight list?
They're on the flight list.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And they went to the party.
Say I know that.
I know that.
Yeah. So it's it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, and that's a provable fact.
Yeah, that they were on the flight logs. Okay,
Yes.
I haven't checked that, but I don't think none of those people have been investigated after Epstein was.
No, after Epstein
didn't kill himself.
After Epstein didn't kill himself in prison, none of those people were investigated.
But Diddy's gone down, or he's in jail right now for the things. So much is happening right now. And anyways, I didn't want this podcast to be all about that, but we just had this happen like 2 days ago, and it was so interesting to kind of interface with that. So one of the things I wanted to talk about that I think this topic kind of relates to is speaking the truth and standing up. It's very difficult. Obviously, lots of things going on in the last few years. We have all done our parts in our own ways to be like, we're not going to participate in these things. So I want to ask individually, each of you, how you navigate being in integrity with yourself and standing up and saying what you need to say. Obviously, there's lots of examples probably from both of you in the last 4 years, but how you navigate that in your own life and what that means to you to be in integrity and speak the truth.
I have so many things going in my head right now.
Please take the floor.
Oh, sure. I wasn't saying to take the floor. I said maybe I need some time. My first thought, if I may, can I ask the viewers a question? Given what Graham and Kerry have said about John Podesta, whose name I have the hardest time remembering, what would you do? Would you freeze? Would you approach? Would you call the police? Like if you had watched all the, because I was shocked at the way you guys reacted. I was so like, what is happening right now? Like, who is this guy? Like, I was like, all my self-defense training and military training popped into my head. And I'm like, and then you went out to scope for like snipers. And I was like, okay, hang on. I don't even know who this is. Like, and I found it interesting that my thought was just like, pray. I prayed. And then I just thought, well, there's nothing he can do to me. Like, I mean, for one, he's a frail old man, first of all. And second of all, even if he has guards, God's got my back. I didn't really think anything of it, to be honest. Yeah. But I wonder what people are doing in general. And do not only what would you do in that situation, but then being honest with yourself and going, what would I do? And then going and asking yourself, is what I would have done the right thing to do? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I just feel like it's an important question, because
I think the context is important too, because if somebody doesn't know who he is or doesn't have the references,
correct,
of, seeing a bunch of content about him, and the stories about him and the rumors and conspiracies, then it's like, well, I don't know what I do. I let him have his dinner. Like, who cares?
The subject of especially sex trafficking and pedophilia for me, it makes my blood boil. So I do stand in my truth with it, but I usually vocalize it in quite a brazen way, because it's a weird thing, but for me it's sort of a test. Set in a room, if this subject comes up, I'm like, all pedophiles are monsters and they deserve to die. And like, that might not be everyone's outlook on it, but for me, when you cross the line with a child, when you cross the line with true innocence for your own gratification,
pleasure,
you've crossed the line, and you're unforgivable for me. And I'm more than happy to vocalize that, but in terms of outward actions, at the end of the day, I mean, even just having this event happen to us, I didn't do anything other than
scope the area
and sit at the table. And I sure as heck was not going to go up and confront him with anything, especially lacking my own physical proof.
Right. I mean, I did feel the urge to ask him a lot of questions.
Well, that's the other thing too, right?
You're like, I didn't know enough. I was like, wait, so pizza something? Okay, maybe I'll ask him about pizza.
Should have asked him if he could recommend a pizza.
I mean, we were at a pizza place. I don't know. Sorry, not to make fun of it, because I'm like, Kerry, when it comes to pedophilia, like, I'm with you, man. Like, that makes my blood boil. I think the difference between us is I do believe in forgiveness, but I believe repentance has to come.
Not interested, but that's cool, right? That's the beauty of different beings.
Absolutely. But I want justice, 100%. Yes. Like, I mean, if he's guilty, that was my prayer. Yeah. My prayer at the table was, Lord, if he's guilty, make it public and let justice be served.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Because there are kids out there that I can't even imagine.
Also, I just wanted to say, I love that we are doing way heavier material on your podcast.
Oh, yeah,
this is super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important. And that's what kind of like I wanted to say, is that like, that's why I wanted to open the conversation with this, because it's difficult to talk about, but you need to talk about it. And that's why I'm like, kind of wanted to dovetail into like integrity and speaking the truth, because it's not easy. And a lot of people will avoid it because of the consequences of like being misinterpreted, or you say the wrong thing, or you misspeak, or like you get canceled or whatever.
I guess I struggle to represent my truth in a useful manner when a subject like this boils my blood. And they're really, I don't have a lot of triggers.
Or emotionally
charged things. Like, I can talk about most anything. But when pedophilia comes up, I just sort of see red. And I'm very limited in my dialogue. It seems to be expressions of kind of rage. Yeah. And I will and am working on that, because that's not a useful means of expressing your truth.
But it also, I think to a certain degree, it kind of speaks to an inherent, built in our DNA protection of innocence. So you're seeing this as like, if this is true, I need to protect that innocence. And I think that's built into all of us.
I love that you said that. And you're right. I never had to be taught that or thought about it. It was not the morality I had to learn. It's in my DNA.
And on the flip side, though, I have to ask, where did they end up? Like the people that are actually committing these heinous crimes and evils, like how did they not have that?
Protection of innocence?
Yeah. Why weren't, like you were just saying that we didn't have to learn it.
Yeah.
So what happened on their side?
Well, I got some theories about that. Yeah. I don't know if these are true, but my sort of intuition about this is if you try and get stimulated, like a drug. If you're taking a drug, it wears off after a while, so you either have to take more or a harder drug. And so I think people in positions of power, they get off on more power. They get off on orgies or bigger things that are far and farther outside of what is the norm. And so once you get to a certain point of like, well, I've done all these things, what's next? Well, what if this is a really young girl? She's underage, just a year or so. It's like, oh, wow, okay. And then there's the next level of like blackmail. So then using this as a form of getting into inner circles of elitism and protection so that they know they have something on you if it's been recorded at Epstein Island or whatever.
That's what I thought. It was like had a lot to do with you can never betray the trust of the cult because they have all this dirt on you. They have dirt on you.
Yeah, and the worst kind of dirt.
Yeah.
It would destroy you if it came out. So they're like, okay, well, I'll do whatever you say now.
Yeah, it's suicide level.
Yeah.
If someone found out.
Yeah.
I feel like I understand what you're saying, so I want to recognize that first. But I also feel like doing those acts destroys you.
Yeah, it does. But I think personally, I'm just again hypothesizing, but I think you get to a point where you've completely lost your own heart and soul, that now it's not about that. Right. You're about trying to feel something,
it's
and
like
that fear.
Us and them, right?
It's like what?
It's like us and them, where the us and everyone else in the world is them, and they just don't matter.
I see.
And there's no level of empathy or compassion. They actually get off on that level of terror and fear because it makes them feel something. You know, I think it's that dark, and it's unfortunate, and I don't like talking about it, but it needs to be talked about because there are people that are doing this. Not to say that John Podesta is involved in it, but regardless of that, there's actually this happening. And so it's a very hard topic to talk about, but it's important to talk about.
And we are seeing a lot of democratic and liberal agendas that are trying to entertain the notion of pedophilia being okay.
Oh, like what do they call
tons
that?
of that stuff popping up. Minor attracted adults, and I'm just like, no, that's not a thing. Yeah. That could only come from an extremely damaged, mentally ill individual.
Yeah. There's that. What was it? Was you that sent me an article or something about a guy saying that someone was violating his rights for not able to express his love for children? Was that you?
Yeah,
that sent me
it was a violation of his rights that he's not allowed to express his love for children.
Yeah, that was what he was trying to argue.
That's what he was trying to argue.
Yeah, and it's like you have to start speaking, and I know many of you probably watching this are on the same page with this, but you have to vocalize it. Yeah. You have to stand up and say, I'm not okay with this, and I'm going to explicitly say, I'm not okay with this.
And I think I would like to highlight, like essentially, no matter what action you take in life, if that action is compromising, stealing, or raping the innocence of another being, you have no right to do it.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Exactly. And also, children aren't allowed to get tattoos or drink alcohol. How can they consent to...
They can't. They can be manipulated into going along, but they cannot consent.
Yeah, exactly. So, back to speaking truth and integrity, boys. And last disclaimer, Mr. John Podesta or anyone affiliated with him, we're not saying that he's involved with any of this. And I really hope, obviously, that he is not, and that this is all horrible rumors, and that none of this is true.
We hope they were just gourmet hot dogs.
Or whatever.
Wagyu.
Yeah, exactly. It's more so of the idea and the topic of speaking truth and also expressing ourselves, and then also dealing with, conspiracies and documentaries online that you see, and then coming face to face with the reality of potentially something that's involved with that, and seeing through it and being like, is there actually facts for this? So I'm just saying right now, there has been proven evidence of him being involved in any of the things we've mentioned. Just want to say that out loud.
But I love what you're saying, because honing your truth for uncomfortable situations allows you to hold your power so that you don't necessarily freeze in that situation.
Yes.
And admittedly, when I saw John, I froze a little bit.
Right?
Yeah, I did. I froze.
Yeah.
It scared me to see him. Not like,
but
not like I'm
because of what you thought you knew about him.
Yes. I'm not afraid of the man. Yeah. I'm not afraid of the evening or something like that. It's just the subject matter. If it's real, that caused me fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's rewind to integrity. Don, speaking up, speaking the truth. Past 5 years now have been quite a challenge. I more so not want to have like a recap of that, but more so about how do you find the importance of staying in your own integrity and speaking truth? How do you navigate that? And what sort of like reflections do you have for people that maybe are struggling to speak up and just share what they think about things?
Well, I think if they're not going to speak up, and I could be wrong, but my first thought is there's one of two things. One, you actually don't believe what you think you believe. Otherwise, you would say something. Or two, you're so afraid of what somebody else would do to you or say about you that that fear makes it incapacitates you. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
And either way, I think if either one of those is your answer, you really need to look at what you believe and why. Because for me, like, if I believe something is true and someone's hurting somebody else and I don't do something about it, the truth is I don't believe it. I don't believe that I would stand up for truth or stand up for the innocent that's being hurt. And therefore, I'm a liar who's got some problems.
Or you just have a lot of fear.
Or I have a lot of fear. Yeah. And if that fear is overwhelming my moral positioning, I guess, in this particular conversation, then I would personally look inside and go, what is my real moral position? Mm-hmm. If fear has more power over the truth, then I got to make some changes.
So has it ever been like that for you, where the fear has been close or more than what you believe?
That is a very good question. And I had a feeling you were going to ask that, so my brain started jogging. So I was trying to define it. I don't know, because, I mean, you knew me before I started following Christ, and you know me now. I don't know if I would have called it fear back then, but maybe it was. It was fear. If I had a fear before I gave my life to Christ, it would have been a fear of losing control. Okay. And that fear of losing control, I would convince myself wasn't about control. It was about being right, which is control. And therefore, in that mind frame, I would often use manipulative tactics to get what I want, those kind of things, which meant what? I don't care about other people. I care about myself first, which isn't about doing what's right. It's about doing what's right for me, or what I believe is right for me. But since giving my life to Christ, I don't really think about what's right for me. I'm always trying to figure out, I mean, I do on occasion, sure. Like, do I want ice cream? Yes. I'm going to go get some ice cream.
Are you going to sleep tonight?
Do I want to sleep? Yes. That'd be wonderful. Doesn't always work. But I try my best to put others first. I try my best to go, is what I want going to hurt somebody? No. Okay, great. Then it doesn't really matter. But if I'm putting what I want before somebody else's needs, I don't like that anymore. Straight up. Like, I really do want to spend my life serving people, loving people the best I can. And I think that's where the integrity comes from. And honestly, fear doesn't really enter into it.
In the recent past then, have you ever had you never had a fear that's kind of like encroached upon or been close to, that you're like, ugh?
I've got one.
Okay.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Even just being outspoken as an actor, being outspoken on social media in the era we're living in, I risk being canceled every day just for having opinions that are counter to a woke ideology because I prefer statistical math. That alone could get me kicked off of
anything.
Acting.
And so a lot of actors won't share their thoughts and stuff. Why do you decide that this is important to you to do?
Because I can live with being fired from a TV show. I can live being fired from a TV show, but I can't remain quiet when I see these posts with mass support, basically arguing for special privileges, racism, and that's basically what's happening. Is fighting for special privileges for any single one group is the same thing as being a racist. That's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, but that's the truth. And I'm not a racist, and I'm not sexist. I believe in actual equality. I'm completely against DEI ideology. I think ability trumps inclusivity every time. And because I see that, and because I believe that it's, at this point, as a species, we need to think as one species. These cultural lines in the sand are killing us as a species. So when you look at that, we are a very, very weak species. And I'm hoping that soon we realize we are one species, and there is no point in getting obsessed with cultural lines or different deities. It's a silly way to divide ourselves. And I know for a fact that if I was an alien life form looking down at planet Earth from outer space, I would not risk a visit to this kind of chaos. And so I believe for my own spiritual, philosophical purpose, it behooves me to stand in my truth and speak about these things, even if it jeopardizes my experience here. I believe that ultimately the energy I'm putting into the universe is more important.
So your personal faith or belief system and being in integrity with that, of speaking up, speaking the truth, is far more important than a job at this point. Yeah,
exactly.
Oh yeah, all day. Did you say DEI?
Yeah.
What is
diversity,
that?
equity, and inclusion.
Ah, thank you.
So that's a program or an idea, an ideology that I think probably had some intention of, hey, we want to see and acknowledge more people and include them in our workspaces. We don't want to be like, oh, you have a different culture or you look different from us, so we don't want to hire you. So then this initiative is coming, hey, let's kind of encourage or force people to basically include others and put them in positions that they may not be qualified for.
Or may not want to do.
Well, yeah, I don't know, maybe that.
I mean,
maybe
let's be honest.
I think the idea is like, it started out as like we want to try and get people to, you can't force.
Originally, we were trying to just be like, okay, we don't want to judge people on the color of the skin because the best candidate for the job might be a woman who happens to be gay, who happens to be black. And that should be the person who gets the job.
If they're the best person.
But if they do not have, if they are not the best person with the best ability for it, then they shouldn't be considered. That's what I agree.
Yeah, and I'll say the counter argument to this, because I've had some conversations with people about this, is like, if, let's say for women, the conversation I was having around women directors, and they're saying, well, hey, if we can't have the ability, if we never get the opportunities in the first place.
Go to school.
That was the argument, was like, we need to be given these opportunities in order to get the experience to be able to compete.
I would personally feel so mocked by culture if somebody handed me an opportunity based on that alone.
Or your skin color, your gender. Or whatever,
I would feel humiliated and ashamed of myself.
I mean, I agree with you. I'm just saying the opposite side to this is this, and I agree that if you want a job, it should be based upon how you can perform that job.
100%.
Yeah, because otherwise we have people that are in positions of great responsibility that are not the best people, and then their lives at stake, or there's major repercussions to that.
Exactly. Society suffers.
Yeah, so it started out with this like sort of like hey, we want to like be more supportive, but you can't force the evolution of consciousness. Yep. The evolution and awareness of human beings needs to happen naturally, and if you try and force it through mandates or different things to make people more inclusive or respectful, it will always backfire because it's not natural, and it won't be a solid foundation for people to stand on.
Well, for example, here in Canada, working on Heartland, we do 50% of the directors must be female, which is still weird to me. And so basically, because there are such a small number of female directors in Canada, 50% of the work is going to 15% of the people.
Oh, interesting.
It's an interesting dichotomy. And this is what happens when you do not favor statistics and math and instead navigate with your feelings. Ultimately, in situations where you are making choices for other people, you're going to cause more chaos, more upheaval, and less evolution in us.
Yeah. The other thing I want to throw into this mix too is that there's been such amazing art, literature, and creations that have come from the struggles of somebody who has been disadvantaged and looked down upon, and it made them work so hard to overcome that. And I'm not saying that people should create situations for that to try and get good art or whatever. It's just by trying to play God and like step in and like force people to think a certain way and do these different things and force it to be 50-50. I think Trudeau did that too with his cabinet when he came in 2016, or 2015.
Yes, the fruit salad prime minister did that.
He tried to like say equal, I think it had to be equal women and men in his cabinet or whatever. Not who were the best people for the job.
And then he fired Chrystia Freeland.
And the other, Jody Wilson Rayburn, or Rayburn, or whatever her name is.
I know this is probably highly controversial, maybe not the right place for Time Has Come, but fuck you, Trudeau.
So, yeah. So I think it's important.
Yeah.
Add to the conversation.
Just adding a little controversy. Sorry.
Sorry. Where were we there? We were talking
man.
about, speaking the truth. So, Kerry James, you're obviously not afraid to speak your mind and say what's important to you.
I think when you use a tool as powerful as math, listen, there's a million different ways to find proofs in the world, but when you use math, it is hard to argue with someone that understands the math. And that's why I prefer it, because math doesn't care about right and wrong. It only points to what is.
Yeah.
So I have a question. This may seem out of whack. I like that you go with math, because oftentimes we have conversations and you're not wrong. You're like, the math adds up. I'm like, great. But how does love calculate? Like, how does, because I try to operate from a place of love. Like,
Okay.
First of all, let's just start with, I am not political at all. So there's that. I know nothing about politics, if you haven't figured that out already. Do I think Trudeau did a good job? No, I do not. I do not think Trudeau did a good job. Do I think Trudeau's the only one that did all the work? No, not at all. I know there's a whole team of people behind him, that made things, and he was the face, and he personally said some really
horrible things,
foolish things and ignorant things as public addresses during the whole COVID thing. But I try my best to remember, he's a fallible man. I'm a fallible man. God loved me enough to sacrifice his son for my sins. And God also says he sacrificed his son for his sins. So how do I love someone like Trudeau knowing the math?
So I don't personally, we ascribe to different things.
Yes,
So
of course.
I don't ascribe to the idea of a God. And for someone like me, hearing that is basically like, well, cool, but my cartoon character is stronger than your cartoon character. That's how someone like me hears the idea of faith.
Okay, well, let's take out the faith altogether. So you know love.
Yes. So what I would say is I'm not interested in trying. There is no growth for me in trying to love a man like Trudeau.
Okay.
That would be counter to who I am as a person. As far as love being a tool of navigating, how would I see that mathematically?
Yeah.
It's easy. Science takes a perspective. So the perspective is let's watch Don navigate.
Right.
Don is choosing love.
Right.
Let's watch how love
Works
in every
out.
interaction works out for him.
Okay.
And that's how math would be applied to love.
I like
and then
that.
we could go, well, Don is expressing hate right now. Let's watch him and see how hate is helping or altering his life.
So using your philosophy then, how would you not being able to love Trudeau, just with, given all he's done, work out for you in the long run? Why is that a better operating system for you to hate him than to love him?
Well, I'm sure in a year or two, I'll forget the man ever existed. But right now, Trudeau is an ideology. The man, he's not a man anymore. And that's what happens when you put yourself on a stage. You are choosing to, if you're representing something and you were the face and symbol of it, then that is the point that we are all going to discuss. And that's a choice you make by standing on a soapbox saying, I have the right idea. Just like me talking in this podcast home for all the audience may feel that I'm wrong about a million things. And the audience has the right to do that.
Right.
That's the right.
That makes sense. Like the math of, that's weird. The math of love. It's interesting.
I mean, I think what I heard from your question, when you asked it, was there is math and things that check out logically, make sense.
Yeah.
But then there's, where is the space for the things that exist beyond the mind and the logic and the math? And how do those work into your life?
I think those work into the life of the individual. The individual experiences that. And I have that unique expression within self. But I think that is the beauty of math and science as a governing tool for society, so that we all have room to have enriched individual lives where we have our own senses of love for the world.
Kerry, you have a couple of stories that I don't know if you've ever shared them before. You shared them with me. You've had interactions with people that you have personally experienced a crime, so to speak, or some abuse or harassment, and you've stepped in. Have you ever talked about those stories publicly?
No, I haven't actually.
Do you want to or no?
Sure, yeah. It doesn't bother me.
Because, obviously you speaking your mind here and everything, it also translates not to just, a bunch of talk, but when you have seen, I think it was a story about a woman that was being harassed on a public transportation system in Vancouver called the SkyTrain. You stepped in.
Didn't work out well for me. But that's the thing is when you make these choices, if you're choosing to get in an altercation, a physical one with somebody else, and you believe it's the right reason to do so, I have already, I've done the math in my head. I'm like, this is happening and it's going to happen. So that means that, and that's part of what it is, in my opinion, to be a healthy male, is I was not thinking about my wellness, safety, or future. It had to be done regardless of the outcome or what happened to me. And I'm sure in retrospect, if something horrible had happened to me, I would have to deal with all that. And that would be very hard for me. But in the moment, it didn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
So do you want to mention what happened?
I don't want to highlight any violence.
Okay.
But yes, a woman was being harassed on a train. I stepped in. Things got very physical very quickly. And during the scuffle and emergency, I was also swept up and taken in by the authorities, which they should have done. An authority's job in this situation is to anyone who is enacting in the violence needs to be calmed down and detained, and then things can be sorted out. And that's exactly what happened. And I got to walk away from it all without any negative impact on my life such whatsoever, except I missed a party with my friends.
Right. He called me the next morning and I was like, what happened? He's like, I spent the night in jail. I was like, what? Tells me the whole story. I was like, oh my gosh, dude. Fascinating. And Don, have you ever been in a situation like that where you've had to step in either physically or protect innocence or to speak the truth that has ended in an altercation or a physical fight?
Yes, of course. And there's two responses from before and since coming to Christ. Like, I was the guy that would jump in and fists flying, tackle people. That's my training with all my MMA training and stuff. It was just like, oh, just take him down. But now, which is why I asked about the calculation. It's really, you got me thinking about that. I like it. Now I find there's a way to step in, or have found there's a way to step in where I don't have to get violent. Sometimes, so as we've talked, I've been a bully. I was a bully when I was younger. In every school I went to, I was the bully. But I know from that experience, most of the time, not always, some bullies are just, they've got an anger thing that they've got to deal with. But most of the time, they're mostly just talk. And if someone has the courage to stand in front, they'll back down.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Yeah. Not always. And I'm not recommending, if you're not prepared and haven't thought it through, don't do it. But if you are feeling that someone is being hurt and or being treated unjustly, and you know it's wrong, I think you owe it to them and yourself as a human being to step in. Step in. Like, how many times have you watched a YouTube or Instagram story where someone did and you weep or your heart sinks and you're like, yes, that's the right thing to do. But then if you do that, do you think I would never do that? And if you think you never would, why? Like, if it's that beautiful to watch, why wouldn't you do that?
I think identity is a big part of it. So if you don't see yourself as someone like that,
right,
then you're like, I could never do that. That's not me. Only those types of people do it.
And I do believe we're all created very differently.
Yeah. And I do think too, like, people that aren't accustomed to heightened situations the way that you are,
it scares them.
It not only scares them, but the reality becomes less than real for a moment. It's just kind of like, is this even real?
Shock. Yeah.
And you have trained yourself not to have that shock response, where I think, 99.9% of us, and it's been a very long time since I've been in any kind of physical altercation or any kind of real heated meeting.
Right.
At this point, I might have earned back my shock response, or that, whoa.
Yeah, what's happening?
Freeze a little.
Yeah. What is it? Freeze, fight, or flight?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or fight, or freeze.
Yeah.
Actually, you said I trained myself. I did train, but I wonder sometimes, was it because I was already like that I was attracted to the training?
Probably.
You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing. There was a podcast that a bunch of ex-Special Forces guys put together. Pat Miller's part of it. And they posed a question about protecting people, and how it was something along the lines of how a soldier goes to Afghanistan or wherever war is to protect Canadians and Americans from the violence. And they're like, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? And I was like, well, to be honest, I think it's not a great thing. I think it's nice to protect people, but if they don't know what you're protecting them from, they don't learn the value of you stepping in. But when in your situation, from what I understand, a woman was being mistreated and you stepped in, she knows the value of what you just did, and you do too. And I think people need to see that, people need to witness that, and people need to learn how to do that. Because if no one steps in, if you say, oh, the next person will do it, what if the next person's saying you'll do it?
Exactly.
Like someone has to start the change.
So I just want to throw in here, because I've never been in the situation like you have, Kerry, and Don, that you have, with a physical fight that I needed to step in. I have been in a situation where there's been a fight that's about to happen, and I'll tell that story, but I didn't stop it from happening through violence.
Right.
I just felt like I was inspired, or I kind of knew what needed to be done, and I did it almost like a Jedi mind trick type thing. And that's how I've always navigated those situations. And it's not always going to work. Sometimes it's going to come down to physical violence. And I've been blessed that I haven't been into one of those situations.
I don't know, with the story you're about to tell.
You know the story?
You are so close to physical violence. I almost think that some people like yourself do have the superpower to just shift people.
And that's what happened, was that it was like a shift. And so we were at, what's the Wreck Beach? It's Wreck Beach?
Yeah, Wreck Beach.
Wreck Beach in Vancouver, up by UBC.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of us sitting around a fire, having a good time. Group of drunk guys, maybe 12 guys, roll up, they're looking for a fight. And so they just want to find a fight. So they find the one guy who's dressed more feminine because he was gay, and they're like, we're gonna pick a fight with this guy. So they start picking on him. And I was like, okay, this is gonna get bad. Like, somebody's got to do something, because if they don't, they're literally going to start dragging this guy out and beating him up. So I stood up and I went over to the lead guy and I just put my arm around him and I started talking to him like he was my best friend. And I was acting. I was like, I'm committed to this character 100%. He's my best friend. I haven't seen him in forever. And I just put my arm around him and I was like, hey man, we want to go over here. And I started walking with him with my arm around him. And he was like so confused, and he was like disoriented. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, where are we going? And he's like, and he's literally said to me, do you want to fight me? But he didn't, he said it like, do you want to fight me? Like, he was confused. And I was like, no man, I don't want to fight you. Like, I was like, oh, we're having a good night. You guys are having a good night. Like, I know you guys are gonna have, like, whatever I said, something like that. I redirected the energy and just, pointed him another way. So he started walking, said, you guys have a good night, like, catch you later, whatever. And he walked off with his crew. I turned around and walked back. And then one of my drunk friends stood up with his beer and was like, yeah, that's right. You better walk away.
Oh, no.
So,
thanks, friend.
Please don't be that friend.
and so the main guy, the leader of the crew, walks back up to this friend of mine, punches him in the face, knocks him over backwards over the log, dumps his beer all over him, and then walks away. So this guy got his fight.
Yeah, he welcomed it.
The buddy of mine got his, like, F you, buddy. Anyways, so I say that story because, I want to acknowledge that it's important to speak your truth. It's important to stand up and protect innocence, but it doesn't always have to come to violence. And I'm not saying that you can always get away from violence. Sometimes it requires you to physically get in there to protect somebody. And I think it's important to have training and to know how to handle yourself. Otherwise, you might get hurt, and it'd be far better for you to have some sort of training to understand how to physically move a body around or put someone in a submission hold or whatnot. But it doesn't always have to be violence. And I'm
I don't think
grateful
it ever does.
I haven't been in those situations, but I do understand the importance of knowing how to navigate that physical aspect.
I think it was about 10 or 12 years ago you told me that story, and that had a sincere impact on me. When you first told me that story, and then the one other story which you had told me 17 years ago about somebody striking you in the back of the head while walking down Granville Street, and your reaction was to turn and be stunned and just filled with compassion for the person. And that shifted them on a dime too. And I just remember those two stories, and to this day having a massive impact on how I navigate my life now, because I'm always attempting to look for that path instead of the one that leads to violence.
Yeah, of course.
Or even just a yelling match.
Yeah. Some guy hit me in the back of the head. He was homeless. He was obviously on alcohol or drugs or something, and he thought I was laughing at him, but I was laughing at the oddity of the situation. I walked by and he said, "Do you want to make $50?" And it was just so random. I laughed because I was like, Like, what? So I just laughed. I said, no, I'm okay. And he says, what do you mean, you don't want to make $50? I said, no, I'm okay. Like, thank you, though. And I kind of smirked because it was so random. And he thought I was laughing at him. And so he came up and hit me in the back of the head, and I turned around and he was crying, sobbing, and he was waiting for me to fight him. And I just was like, dude, are you okay? And he's like, don't ever laugh at me again. And he turned and walked away. And I was like, oh man, this is a very upset, disgruntled person that thought I was laughing. So whatever. That's the story. But anyways, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing that. I was trying to get an answer out of you about integrity and stepping up. I think, Kerry, you gave me a good answer. I think I got an answer from you, Don.
I mean, you can ask again if you want.
Sorry, what'd you say?
You can ask again if you want. I don't know.
Did you feel you answered it?
I have too many questions about, well, let's define integrity. Let's define truth. Let's define, there's so many questions in my head. Being
able to put your head on the pillow at night and feel like...
Every night since I've given my life to Christ, honestly, I sleep, and that's a truth. And actually, I don't know if I've ever told anybody that before, but I have not been a good sleeper my whole life until I gave my life to Christ, and then was like, okay, I'm not afraid of what man can do to me. I can stand up lovingly, because I've never had a problem standing. I like conflict. It's a strange thing to like, but because if we disagree and you're going to stand up for what you believe, I get to learn something.
Totally.
It's uncomfortable, but so is learning to walk for the first time, or anything we do for the first time is uncomfortable. So I'm learning. It's uncomfortable for me still, but I enjoy it because I know eventually it's going to land one way or another. You're going to learn. I'm going to learn. And if we do it in a loving way, we become closer friends.
Totally.
And I think that's kind of what's been happening with the three of us.
That's what I love about all of us. Yeah.
If you haven't figured it out yet, the three of us don't always see eye to eye on what we think is true, what we stand for, or all those things. But we are willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the topic is, which is why I love you guys. I love talking to you guys.
Likewise, truly.
So, random. Sorry, that was distracting.
There's a dog taking a piss in the background.
It's that was random.
It's Mexico.
It's Mexico.
Hola, ¿cómo está? But what was the question was,
The question was about
integrity? Sorry, I forgot.
Well, Kerry was talking about how he's important for him to speak his mind and share what is in
Yes.
So he's integrity with himself. And if he loses his job, whatever.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't have that courage or capacity.
Correct.
You obviously do.
I do.
What is it that has brought you to that place?
Right.
That makes you be able to put your head on the pillow at night and go I'm going to do this, even if it destroys my life, even if it destroys my career.
Yeah.
This is the right thing to do.
I think that's a fairly easy answer. It may not resonate with everybody, but I destroyed my life before. I did it all for me. It was all selfish gain. It was all those things. But since my flip to faith, now I do it in love. Or at least I try to. I mean, it doesn't always come across that way. I want it to every time. But sometimes I open my mouth. I'm like, okay, I'm saying this in a loving way. And then I watch the person's body language. I'm like, this is not being received in a loving way. I need to change or ask questions or whatever. So for me, yes, the change for me has been, I've never had a problem speaking what I believe to be true. I've never had a problem setting up boundaries. What I've had a problem doing is doing that with love and care for the other person. And I would say the difference between me then and me now is now I'm learning or have learned better to do that with love.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
For myself, Kerry, thanks for asking me. For me, it came from, I think it was highlighted for me, if I could point to an experience for my float tank, where I kind of recognized the nature of this reality all being made from love, God's love, however you see that, but love. And then, so now it's all of this is secondary to that cosmic reality of all encompassing love of God, or however you want to say that. I've told this story many times, but effectively I had a float tank experience where I got in a tank full of salt water, 12 inches of water, heated at the same temperature as your skin, air and the water at the same temperature. You float in there for 90 minutes. I relaxed. I was able to leave my body and have this transformational experience where it's hard for me because it wasn't my ego or Graham, the personality of Graham. It was my soul or my higher soul or whatever. I don't even know what the term is, but I rejoined this cosmic love, which to me is how I understand God now. And it was the most beautiful experience I've had in my life. So for me, standing up in integrity and feeling into what needs to be done and doing it is because I have an understanding that all of this is this beautiful illusion, this beautiful story, this beautiful gift of a sacred life, but yet it is secondary to that reality. So because I've had a taste of that, I'm like, all I want is to move closer to that. And for me, being in integrity with myself, speaking up and doing what I feel needs to be done in alignment, it brings me closer to that. And I want nothing other than that. I just want to share that with everybody. So, and in each in their own way, like I know, Kerry, you have a different operating system. Don, you have a different faith and operating system as well. But I feel like we're all sort of pointing towards a deeper appreciation. And
I completely agree with what you're saying. Yeah. And like you said, we might use different ideas, but we're trying to arrive at the same point.
At the same destination. Yeah. And we may differ or disagree on if yours works or mine works or yours works, but we all have a sincere thirst to take the journey and to explore it and to be like, this is working for me, or this is what I feel called to do and to explore and to learn about. So I'm going to take this path. And I think that's kind of what I want to share. And that's why I'm grateful for you gentlemen being on this podcast with me, is because that's what I want to encourage young men to explore for themselves. Whether you want to follow Christ and you want to read the Bible and have a more religious approach in your life, if you feel called to that, fantastic.
I would not call it religious.
Some people do. I know you don't.
Yes, some people do. Yeah. For me, it's not.
You would say, forgive me, you would say follower of Christ.
Yes.
Would be more
absolutely.
so.
Yeah.
And other people like yourself, Kerry, you have a path to life where you want to know the science. You want to see the details. You want to get to the edge of what is known and then move through that and explore the.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anything else how else would you explain your philosophy of moving closer to?
There's following Christ, and then there's an attempt to try and walk beside him.
So that's how you would say it.
And with respect to people that are followers of Christ or religious, I understand that from what I just said, that's not possible. But to me, it's a hell of a lot more noble to try than to hide in the shadow of somebody who's way bigger than you.
And do you feel like, as a follower of Christ, you're hiding in a shadow of Christ?
No, not at all.
How would you explain it?
Well, I mean, Jesus said,
as being a follower of Christ,
he said, you were my servants, but now I call you brothers and friends. So I feel like I walk beside, I mean, I don't always walk beside him. Sometimes I'm off going,
but that's your aim though.
Yeah. My goal is to walk with him.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Following him because he's leading, but I want to walk with him. I want a relationship, an intimate relationship with Jesus. That's my goal.
That's beautiful.
I want to know him and be known by him.
What does it mean? Because in the context of intimacy, normally that's a man and a woman.
Oh,
so when you say intimacy,
right.
when you say intimacy with your relationship with Christ, what does that look like to be intimate with Christ?
To be honest, I'm still learning. Sometimes it's. Well, to be honest, this trip has been a large thing. I mean, as you know, there's been a bit of a roller coaster for me on this trip, with doors opening, doors closing, misunderstandings, trying to figure things out, trying to be loving, but people misunderstanding. And it's been, but through that, I try to focus, I try to stop and breathe and ask God, talk to Christ and go, what is the right thing to do? What would you do? What would you want me to do? This is what I want to do. This is what I feel like I want to do. But what would you do? And then I open the Bible and I go, okay, well, what does it say? What does it say he did? What does it say I'm supposed to do if I'm following him? And then I do my best to be like him and fail all the time. But I'm like, I feel like as long as I'm approaching whatever it is, whatever that discomfort, that misunderstanding, that open door, that closed door with love, I feel like I get a little bit closer to him. And then I have to, and in my honesty of going, Lord, I want to do what you want to do. You want me to do, but I still want to do this. If I'm honest about what I want to do, even though I know it might not be right, I think that's me getting more intimate with him because he already knows, but me expressing it's kind of like when we talk, like the more detailed and honest we are with each other, the closer we get, right?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And again, I would just love to highlight to the audience the beauty of two people navigating completely different things. But I don't think either one should ever feel like they have the right to be inclined to judge the other. Now, if you want to sit down with your friend the way that me and Don do, we square off over this stuff, but we're making a choice to do that. And we leave those conversations as better friends.
Yeah.
So I think that I think it's really important that neither side judge how the other is arriving at that same destination of love.
Yeah. I want to say yes, and I want to add, there's a difference between judging and condemning. I think we judge. Like, I think we judge each other. We're like, okay, wait.
We have to, right?
Yeah, but we don't condemn each other.
Not at all.
And that's the difference. I know a lot, especially in the Christian community, I use that in quotes, they like to say, do not judge, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, it's condemning. It's the condemning we're not supposed to do.
Yeah, because judging is essentially another word for discernment.
Discernment. And we are called, if you are a follower of Christ, the Bible tells us to be discerning.
Yeah. I like the word discernment, but I always
Yeah.
thought judgment had a connotation of
Negativity.
emotional sort of like, that is wrong, so I'm going to put
I think
that on
it
you.
speaks more to the person who's doing the judging, because that is an arrogant pronouncement of I am the one, I represent what is right and wrong.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I've had this conversation before where if you're in court and the judge judges against you, that feels negative. But if they judge in your favor, it's not negative. It feels good. It's like, oh, I just won the court case from whatever that company was.
But it's because they're not judging you, they're judging your actions.
All right. So I think judgment is good, but condemnation, and nobody on this planet has the right to do that.
So, Kerry, I just asked Don about his intimacy or his moving closer to, in his personal faith, closer to Christ. For you, how do you see yourself deepening your own spiritual belief, your own operating system? What brings you closer to it, and how do you navigate that to have a more intimate relationship?
I think that I'm a very driven just person who's curious, so I seek, and I'm, you know, what's interesting is like I don't know what I'll arrive at. Maybe at the end I will arrive at Yahweh in Christ, but I'm not interested in the path that's been traveled. I'm like, this goes to the extreme, even like I'm not interested in being forgiven for anything, because I feel I have enough room in my own heart to carry any guilt and shame I've created, and that if I take actions that earn guilt and shame, then I should walk with them until I can dismantle it inside myself. I don't need any outside interference in my reality to discover more of who I am. And so this is really interesting, but you know, someone who really enjoys, I'm a hobby enthusiast of quantum science. And when you start, what I think I'm doing by, how to word this, there's being amazed by Mother Nature and all that's around us that Yahweh or Christ may have built. I'm more interested in how God expressed with his brushstrokes, understanding quantum science, understanding
like the nature
time,
of reality,
nature of things. What you're doing is you're you know, from this standpoint, is like you're learning about how God chose to paint, how he used his wrist, what brushes he used, what colors he used, and I'm interested in that the most. I don't actually think that we're even interested in different things, just different ways of admiring a painting or how an artist creates their art. I'm like, how did he achieve this stroke? And maybe that's part of being like a filmmaker background, even just going like, how did he get that shot? Essentially equates to that. I want to try and recreate that shot for myself.
So for you, like reading and understanding how quantum computers works, or these, you know, the 9, what was it called? The 9 level, the 9 waves.
The 9 waves.
The 9 waves. That brings you closer to your like,
for me, it
sense
does.
Of God.
For me, it does. The more that I'm able to expand my own understanding of how everything works, is basically like it's an interesting dichotomy. So if God exists and he's watching someone study his work, if I were God, which I'm not, mortal brain, but if I were watching that, I go, man, look at this kid trying to figure it out all for himself. Oh shit, he's stumbling across the things that I built. That's would make me smile. So if there is a God out there, I hope that my pursuit of how this was all created makes me smile. And that's how I would say I hope to make God proud, is by being the rebel he designed me to be. And it's like watching a child. I hope I make him smile.
Yeah, dude, I love that, man. Thank you for sharing that. Well, thanks, boys, for doing this podcast. We could probably talk for another hour, but we're getting eaten by mosquitoes out here, and
Batteries are dying.
probably.
I think I got sour blood. They ain't touching me.
Well, that's good.
Nice.
But gentlemen, thank you for sharing your insights in your operating systems, your love, your compassion, your logic, your math.
I did just want to quickly highlight the reason I call Trudeau the fruit salad prime minister is because he is someone masquerading as a healthy snack for society, which is essentially he's just a bunch of the culled fruit with a bunch of corn syrup poured on top.
Okay, great. Awesome. Great way to end this show. Kerry said his last word. Don, you have any last words that you want to throw into that?
I don't even know.
It's not bad, right, Don? That's not bad. That's pretty good.
Well, to be honest, when you first said fruit salad, I was like, what does that mean? What are you talking about? So
Right.
you answering it was nice. I was going to ask you.
Masquerading as a healthy snack for society, but ultimately terrible for you.
Just fattening.
And it's always the culled fruit. It's never the good fruit.
All right.
Oh, man. I don't know. My final words would just be, I love you guys. I really do. I appreciate every conversation we ever have, no matter how frustrating they can be or how we can be like, it feels like we're so far apart, but like that can be sad sometimes, but it always ends in awesome.
Yeah.
It always does. And I appreciate that.
I love that I have a friend like you, Don, that is willing to have these discussions with me because, again, my goal is the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
If someone's not willing to talk to me, I can't grow or learn.
No,
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. I want to learn.
And I love that this is now your first time down with us, joining this kind of group vacation. Second time for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I hope we keep this kind of thing alive for the rest of our lives.
It'd be fun.
Oh, that'd be cool.
It'd be fun.
Yeah. Mexico's sweet.
Mexico.
Would we do it somewhere else too?
Heck yeah.
Yeah, okay, sweet.
I know
We can do
you
somewhere
got
else.
big plans for exploring the globe, and I think it'd be a cool opportunity for me and some of the other friends, Don, to come to those places.
Yeah.
Shake
Do it
it up.
in different places as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sweet.
Podcasts around the world, yo.
Yeah. Yo. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Hopefully all the tech worked, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the podcast. I appreciate you watching all the way to the end. Now, I always like to end with a question, a reflection, something that can help you digest and integrate what you've learned in this episode. For me, my reflection has been, what are the stories, the narratives, the films that I am ingesting and not questioning in my life? Can I be sure that this is true? And if not, how am I letting this impact my brain and my mind? This is really what the question that came to me, and I'm searching for the answer continuously because of this interaction that I had with John Podesta there with my two friends. I loved the conversation with Kerry and Don, and there were so many more topics covered. However, the real takeaway for me was, how is the stories that we take in through the news, through the internet, through the mainstream media, but also through the alternative media, impacting our psyche, and how is it interfering with or enhancing our lives? There is a constant pursuit of truth that I'm on. Now, I love the quote by Denzel Washington. If you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. But if you watch the news, you're misinformed. You have to understand narratives. You have to understand agendas, who's funding what, and what are they really after. I find it fascinating to dive into these questions, to really look at things, and also to have conversations with people that I maybe don't agree with. Now, you might not agree with me. You might not agree with other people in the comments when you're commenting on this episode. What I want to do is, instead of creating arguments, I want to create an atmosphere and an opportunity for you to take a step back and just take a breath and go, do I know this is true? Or am I attached to this belief because I want it to be true? I want it to be this way because I feel like a victim, or I feel like this is an evil that I need to go out and right that wrong. Where is this emotion coming from when you think about these stories and these narratives? Because this is how we're controlled. This is how we're manipulated. And I myself was experiencing that. Now, some of the stories that I've seen may be true. However, I can't prove them, but yet the emotion still overcame me. And so that's what I want to focus on to wrap things up in this episode as a digestion, reflection question for you, is to witness where in your life are the stories of things that are happening in our world getting you to the point of emotional reaction that you can't think clearly. And this is an opportunity for all of us to take a step back, to reflect, and to really ask ourselves, who's controlling our lives right now? Is it an emotion of this story that I'm being triggered by, or charged up by, or overwhelmed by? Am I able to think clearly and logically? Am I able to tune in and move past the judgments of others and maybe ask a serious question? Maybe look at things that other people are telling me not to look at. That's where I really want to leave you in a state of being of just open, but also aware of what's going on within your own body. Because once we can do that, we can break free from the unconscious and we can recognize where we might be being manipulated. Now, thank you for watching that. Thank you for listening to that. I hope that's helpful for you to digest this episode and many other topics that we talked about. And there's so much, but that was the main one I wanted to leave you with. I also want to give a warning about scammers. There's always scammers, probably in the comments or somewhere else, reaching out to you, pretending to be me, my management team, my agent, or whoever else. They're scammers, okay? So please be aware. And if anyone's talking to you with my name, just assume they're a scammer and don't talk with them any further. That's what I wanted to say about that. Unfortunately, a lot of people have been scammed. And I think it's really important for me to continually emphasize this message so that if somebody out there hears this, they go, oh, maybe I'm not actually talking to Graham. So I just want to hopefully protect some people from that scam or all the scammers that are out there. Thank you so much for watching this episode. You can join us to extend this conversation on timehascome.com for our after party. So head on over to timehascome.com. You can join the after party, and get a chance to ask a question and continue this conversation. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Time Has Come podcast, and we'll see you next time.